Tonight we're hearing from a former FBI profiler who says the blood tells the story in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. The mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie vanished nearly 3 months ago, but her disappearance remains a chilling mystery. Investigators have found few clues that we know of. Among them, these grainy images of a masked man on her porch the night she disappeared. And then, of course, there's the blood spatter on her doorstep, which DNA testing confirmed belonged to the 84-year-old grandmother. But while these clues may seem limited, my next guest says these images provide a treasure trove of information on Guthrie and what happened to her that night.
A camera was tampered with in the dark. An elderly woman was gone by morning. Her phone was still inside. Her belongings were still inside. Her daily medication was still inside. And outside the home, investigators found the one thing every family fears: blood that was later confirmed to be Nancy Guthrie's. But this case did not stay inside one quiet Arizona neighborhood. It spread across national news, the FBI, ransom claims, public pleas, and one painful question. Was Nancy taken by someone who knew exactly what they were doing? Before we continue, thousands of people watch these documentaries without subscribing. If you do not subscribe right now, YouTube may never show you our next investigation. We release true crime cases daily at 9 p.m., but we can only reach you if you are subscribed. Please hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment your location below. Nancy Guthrie deserves her story told carefully, respectfully, and truthfully. Please help us keep attention on cases like hers. Nancy Guthrie was not someone who simply disappeared without anyone noticing. She was 84 years old, a mother of 3, and the mother of NBC journalist Savannah Guthrie. But before the headlines, she was simply Nancy, a woman who had lived in the Tucson area for decades, known by family and community members as independent, mentally sharp, and deeply connected to her church life. She lived alone in Catalina Foothills, just outside Tucson, Arizona. She had limited mobility and needed daily medication, which made her sudden disappearance even more alarming. On the evening before she vanished, Nancy had gone to dinner at her daughter Annie's home. According to the public timeline, she was dropped back at her own house shortly before 10 p.m. Her garage door closed. The night seemed ordinary. But in the early morning hours of February 1st, everything changed. A doorbell camera at Nancy's home was reportedly tampered with. Later, the FBI released recovered footage showing a masked individual near the front door, carrying a backpack and appearing armed. Investigators said the footage was recovered even after the camera was interfered with. By morning, Nancy did not appear for a scheduled church livestream. That absence triggered concern. A church member contacted the family. Relatives went to Nancy's home and found she was not there. Her phone was still inside. Her essential belongings were still inside. Her medication was still inside. For an elderly woman with limited mobility, this did not look like a voluntary disappearance. Deputies arrived, and the case quickly shifted from a missing person concern to something far more disturbing. Investigators later confirmed that blood found at the residence belonged to Nancy. They also treated the home as a crime scene and said they believed she had been taken against her will. Then came the next layer of fear: ransom claims. Reports surfaced that messages demanding payment had been received, but authorities have not publicly confirmed that the notes came from the person or people responsible. That uncertainty made the case even more frightening. Was someone truly holding Nancy? Or were strangers exploiting a family's nightmare? Savannah Guthrie and her siblings made emotional public appeals asking for proof that their mother was alive. Later, the family offered a major reward for information that could help bring Nancy home. And as days turned into weeks, one thing remained painfully clear. Someone entered Nancy Guthrie's world that night. Someone knew enough. The moment investigators stepped inside Nancy Guthrie's home, the tone of the case changed. This was no longer a missing person report. It was a potential abduction, Authorities from the Pima County Sheriff's Department quickly secured the home as a crime scene. What they saw inside, they later described as deeply concerning. The details were not fully released to the public, but one fact stood out immediately. There was evidence that something had gone wrong inside that house, and Nancy had not left on her own. Sheriff Chris Nanos made it clear early on. Based on what investigators found, they believed Nancy Guthrie had been taken against her will. Given her age and limited mobility, he emphasized something chilling. She could not have gone far by herself. That meant one thing. Someone came for her. The investigation expanded fast. Local deputies were joined by federal agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Additional support came from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, especially because of Tucson's proximity to the border. Search and rescue teams deployed across the surrounding desert terrain. Drones scanned large areas from above. Police dogs were brought in to track scent. Helicopters moved over the region. But despite all of it, there was no trace of Nancy. No confirmed sightings. No physical trail leading away from the house. Nothing. And that absence of evidence became one of the most disturbing parts of the case. Then investigators turned to technology. Nancy's home was equipped with a video doorbell system. At first, it appeared to have been disabled. But data retrieved later told a different story. Footage captured a masked individual approaching the house in the early hours of the morning. The person appeared to be wearing gloves, carrying a backpack, and possibly armed. The footage showed the individual tampering with the camera. At one point, they attempted to knock it off. When that failed, they used nearby objects to block the lens. It was deliberate, calculated, and it suggested planning. Authorities later released still images and short clips to the public, hoping someone would recognize the figure. They described the person as having an average build and estimated height within a narrow range. But even with that, no identification was confirmed, which raised another question. Was this someone completely unknown, or someone hiding in plain sight? Inside the home, investigators found another critical piece of evidence. Bloodstains. Testing later confirmed that the blood belonged to Nancy Guthrie. Authorities did not publicly state how much blood was found or the extent of any injuries. But the presence of blood at or near the entrance added a new layer of urgency. This was not just a disappearance. Something violent may have happened. And yet, there was still no body. No confirmed location. No clear timeline of what happened after she was taken. Then came the ransom claims. Multiple media outlets reported receiving messages demanding payment for Nancy's release. Some of these messages included details about Nancy's home and what she had been wearing the night she disappeared. That detail made investigators take the messages seriously. But there was a problem. The messages were not sent directly to the family. They were sent to the media. That is highly unusual in kidnapping cases. Former investigators pointed out that real abductors typically communicate privately to avoid exposure. Public messages increase risk and reduce control, which led to a troubling possibility. Some of the ransom notes might not be real. At least one person was later arrested for allegedly pretending to be involved in the kidnapping and demanding money. Authorities stated that this individual was not connected to the actual disappearance. So now, investigators had to separate real threats from fake ones, noise from signal, truth from manipulation. Meanwhile, the family was facing something far worse than confusion: uncertainty. Savannah Guthrie stepped away from her professional duties, including major broadcasting commitments, to focus entirely on finding her mother. She appeared publicly with her siblings, making direct appeals. They asked for proof of life. They made it clear they were willing to communicate. They even stated they were prepared to meet demands if it meant bringing Nancy home. But no verified proof of life was ever released. No confirmed contact. Just silence. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Investigators followed leads across different locations. At one point, A person of interest was detained after a traffic stop. A search warrant was executed, but the individual was later released without charges. Another search operation took place just a few miles from Nancy's home. Again, nothing conclusive. A vehicle was seized. Items were examined. Even DNA evidence was collected from objects believed to be connected to the suspect's description, but results either ruled out involvement or remained inconclusive. Each lead seemed promising at first, then faded. And yet, one thing never changed. Law enforcement maintained that Nancy Guthrie did not leave that house willingly. She was taken. The question was by who? And why? Because when you step back and look at everything, the case becomes even more unsettling. A vulnerable elderly woman targeted in her own home. A masked individual captured on camera. Blood evidence inside the residence. Ransom messages that may or may not be real. Multiple agencies involved. And still, no answers. So here is where the case stands at this point. Investigators believe Nancy Guthrie was abducted. They have visual evidence of a suspect. They have forensic evidence tying Nancy to a possible violent event. They have public appeals and a reward. But they do not have a confirmed suspect. They do not have a confirmed motive. And they do not know where Nancy is. Which leads to a deeper question. Was this a carefully planned abduction by someone who knew exactly what they were doing? Or is there something investigators are missing that could change everything? Comment below. Do you think the ransom messages are real and connected to the case, or just distractions that made the investigation harder? Time moves differently in cases like this. At first, everything feels urgent. Sirens, search teams, press briefings, constant updates. Every hour matters. Every lead feels like it could be the one. But then the days pass, and the noise begins to fade. For Nancy Guthrie's family, the search did not slow down, but the public intensity did. Weeks after her disappearance, there was still no confirmed sighting, no verified communication, no proof that she was alive, and that silence became its own kind of evidence. Investigators continued working behind the scenes, but publicly, updates became more cautious, more controlled, more limited. The case had not gone cold, but it had entered a phase that many families fear the most. The unknown. Nancy was officially considered a vulnerable adult, 84 years old, limited mobility, dependent on daily medication. Those details changed how investigators approached the case. They were not just looking for a missing person. They were racing against time. Because if Nancy was being held somewhere, every hour without medication could matter. Every delay could make survival harder. And yet, there was still no trace. Her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, stepped back from her normal life in a way that was visible to millions. She paused major broadcasting responsibilities. She missed significant events. She redirected her entire focus to one thing: finding her mother. But what made her situation even more difficult was that she was not just a daughter. She was also a public figure. Every move she made was watched. Every word she said was analyzed. And every update or lack of update became part of a national conversation. The family made repeated appeals. They asked for help. They asked for information. But more than anything, they asked for proof. Proof that Nancy was alive. Proof that the person or people responsible would communicate directly. Proof that there was still time. At one point, the family made a major decision. They offered a reward. A large one. $1 million for information that could lead to Nancy's recovery. It was a message. To the public. To anyone who might know something. And possibly, to whoever took her. But even that did not bring clarity. Instead, the case became more complicated. Messages continued to appear in the media. Claims of information. Claims of involvement. But none of it could be fully verified. Former investigators pointed out how unusual this was. Real kidnappers want control. They want direct communication. They want leverage. Broadcasting messages publicly creates risk. It invites attention. It weakens control. So what was happening here? Were these messages coming from the same person responsible? Or were they from outsiders trying to exploit a tragedy? Meanwhile, law enforcement continued to re-examine everything. Every piece of footage, every piece of forensic evidence, every possible entry point into the home, every timeline detail. One detail stood out more as time passed: the level of precision. The person seen in the doorbell footage did not act randomly. They approached the camera directly. They tried to disable it. When that failed, they covered it. That suggests awareness. It suggests planning. It suggests intent. Which raises a critical question. Was Nancy specifically targeted? Or was she chosen because she appeared vulnerable? If this was random, the execution does not feel random. If this was targeted, then someone knew her routines, her home layout, her situation. That opens another line of thinking. Did the person know Nancy personally, or had they studied her from a distance? Investigators also had to consider something uncomfortable. The last confirmed person to see Nancy alive was a family connection. Her son-in-law had dropped her off that night. There has been no public accusation against him. But in cases like this, investigators always start close. They examine family, friends, anyone with access, anyone with knowledge, anyone with opportunity. And that process can be painful for families, because it forces questions into places people do not want them to go. As the weeks stretched into months, the case reached a difficult point. There was still active investigation, still analysis, still work happening. But without a breakthrough, everything began to feel suspended. The family was waiting. Investigators were waiting. The public was waiting. Waiting for a mistake. Waiting for a clue. Waiting for something to break the silence. And then another reality began to settle in. Some cases are solved quickly. Some cases take years. And some cases remain unresolved for decades. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the possibility was there. What if this becomes one of those cases? At the same time, technology continues to evolve. New forensic techniques, better data recovery methods, improved analysis of digital evidence. Cases that once had no answers sometimes get reopened years later and suddenly shift. One overlooked detail, one new method, one unexpected match. That is often how breakthroughs happen, not through one big discovery, but through persistence. So investigators keep going. They revisit the footage. They recheck evidence. They follow every tip, even the unlikely ones. Because in cases like this, the answer is usually already there, hidden in something that did not seem important at the time. But until that moment comes, the case remains what it is now: unresolved, open, and deeply unsettling. Because someone knows what happened to Nancy Guthrie. Someone knows where she is, and they have chosen not to speak. Comment below. Do you think this case will be solved with new technology in the future, or will it take someone finally coming forward with the truth? There is no resolution to begin with, no arrest, no confirmed suspect, no recovered victim, no clear ending. And that is what makes the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie so difficult to process. Because everything about this case points to something serious happening inside that home. But nothing has yet explained what happened after. Investigators have been clear from the beginning. They believe Nancy was taken against her will. They have evidence from inside the house that suggests a struggle or a violent event. They have footage of an unknown individual approaching the home in the early hours of the morning. They have confirmed that Nancy's blood was present at the scene. But beyond that, the timeline breaks. What happened after she was taken is still unknown. The doorbell footage remains one of the most important pieces of evidence. A masked individual, gloves, a backpack, deliberate attempts to disable the camera. Everything about that moment suggests preparation. This was not someone stumbling into the wrong house. This was someone who came with a plan. But even with that, the identity of the person has not been confirmed. And that raises a question that investigators continue to face. Is the footage enough? Or is it just a glimpse without context? The ransom messages add another layer of confusion. On the surface, they suggest that Nancy could have been taken for money. But the way the messages were delivered creates doubt. Instead of private communication, they were sent through media outlets. That is not typical behavior for someone trying to control a negotiation. At least one person was later arrested for pretending to be involved and making false demands, which means that not every message connected to this case is real. So now investigators have to separate fact from noise, real threats from opportunists. And that makes the case harder, not easier. Then there is the question of motive. Why Nancy? She was not known to have enemies. She lived a quiet life. She was not publicly involved in anything that would normally attract this kind of attention. So what explains it? One possibility is that she was targeted because she was vulnerable. An elderly woman living alone, limited mobility, predictable routines. But that explanation does not fully match the level of planning seen in the footage. Another possibility is that she was specifically targeted. If that is true, then the person responsible likely knew something about her, her habits, her environment, her situation, and that possibility is far more unsettling. There is also the question of proximity. In investigations like this, attention often turns to people close to the victim, family members, neighbors, anyone who had access or knowledge. There has been no public confirmation of a suspect from within that circle. But investigators always examine it carefully, because statistically, many crimes are committed by someone known to the victim. That does not mean it happened here, but it cannot be ignored either. As time passes, the case enters a different phase. Not inactive, but quieter, less visible, still moving, but without public breakthroughs. Behind the scenes, investigators continue to work, reviewing evidence, retesting materials, analyzing digital data, following tips. Sometimes, cases like this change suddenly. A new piece of technology, a new witness, a new connection, and everything shifts. But until that happens, the case remains suspended between what is known and what is missing. For the family, that space is the hardest part, because there is no closure, no confirmation, no certainty, only questions, and the possibility that answers may come much later or not at all. Nancy Guthrie is not just a name in a case file. She is a mother, a member of her community, a person who had a routine, a life, and people who expected to see her the next day. And now, that absence continues. So this case leaves us with difficult questions. Questions that do not have clear answers. Questions that people will disagree on. And questions that matter. So here's what I want to hear from you. Do you think the evidence points more toward a planned, targeted abduction, or something more random that escalated? Do you believe the ransom messages were connected to the real suspect, or were they mostly distractions that slowed the investigation? Should investigators focus more on people close to Nancy, or does the footage suggest an outsider? And finally, do you think cases like this are more likely to be solved through technology, or through someone eventually coming forward? Because this case does not end with answers. It ends with uncertainty, and the reality that somewhere, someone knows exactly what happened that night. They know what came after the camera went dark. They know where Nancy Guthrie is. And until that truth comes out, the story remains unfinished. If this case stood out to you, follow the channel and turn on notifications. We continue to cover cases where answers are missing and families are still searching. Share your thoughts in the comments, including where you are watching from. Conversations like this keep cases visible, and sometimes visibility is what brings new information forward.